Right, I guess we're live. Let me
It's
just see
looking
on
like it.
YouTube.
The live symbol's up.
Oh, okay, that's good. Okay, so hello guys, welcome to Sega Sessions. So we're back with yeah. So me and Pete decided to try and bring back the live stream after a bit of a hiatus, or nearly probably 2 years. Really think the last stream that we did was probably COVID, and that was a bit of a much bigger stream. So we brought it back, and we're trying to bring in more of the Sega community. People who maybe are away from YouTube as such. So tonight we've got Sega powered Marc Jowett. So Marc's going to go through the ins and outs of running the mag, and take us on his journey really. So hopefully we'll get some comments soon, some viewers. But if not, we'll see how it goes, really, mate. So, yeah, Marc, I think, first of all, if you just want to go and break down sort of how, it's set off, your history with Sega, maybe, and then we can kind of go on to the magazine as well, really.
Yeah, so growing up, I was always in Camp Sega. The first Sega system I had was a Mega Drive. And then sort of going through my senior school years, it was a Saturn and then a Dreamcast. So I've always been in that camp, despite the ship sinking a little bit, shall we say, later on down the line. I was that sort of person that was tied to the Sega Saturn, as all my mates were sort of PlayStation bound. And then I was the guy that was flying the flag for the Dreamcast while all my mates were saying, oh yeah, but PlayStation 2 this, PlayStation 2 that. I don't think there's, in terms of Sega, there's always been that sort of romantic notion, and that they've been the underdogs in recent years. And while the Saturn and the Dreamcast didn't do so well, the games that were on offer, for me, are unrivaled. I was still enjoying games like Panzer Dragoon Saga and Shining Force 3, while my mates are sort of long gone over to the blackened heart of Sony, shall we say. In terms of magazines, so back in the day, my dad used to buy me quite a few different Sega magazines, and we sort of settled on one called Mega, which was a Mega Drive specific magazine. So that one there, we've got a copy there for you.
I remember that.
He always used to read it first. So when he first started buying me magazines, I would have been probably about 9 or 10, and he always used to read them because a lot of them had a lot of crass humour in back in the day. So he always sort of read them first before passing them to me and sort of saying, yes, they're all right, son, you can read them, there's no filth in them. Sega mags came about purely because as I grew older and started earning my own money, I decided to fill in the gaps. So whereas before I had sort of potholed Mega Drive magazines and then ultimately Saturn magazines, Dreamcast magazines, I started to fill in the gaps. So I sort of ventured onto eBay to do so. After about 2008, 2009, I had somebody get in touch with me saying, oh, I've noticed you're buying a lot of magazines on eBay. Are you selling any? And it turns out this guy called Matt was as bonkers as I was in terms of starting to collect full sets of everything. The idea of Sega Mags was born basically on eBay of all places. And we're now, of course, on the way to getting every single UK Sega magazine in existence. You might be able to see behind me, I have a massive wall of magazines there, all sort of ticked and named. We're getting close. There's always a curveball or two when you're getting close, because there are certain magazines that we have no idea of when they finished, especially in the magazine era of the Mega Drive, where you had absolutely no internet whatsoever. It was more a case of trying to find out when issues were sort of dying or dead. It's been a bit of a guessing game. That's the sort of history of Sega mags.
Yeah, I think that kind of journey really echoed myself. I remember when I was a kid, and I remember asking my mum for a NES originally, and one of our neighbours had a Master System, and I remember playing like Double Dragon and Alex Kidd, and naturally just practiced that. And as you got older, it was almost like as you got older, Sega had a console ready for your age bracket, and it was kind of like, naturally went into the Mega Drive for a couple of years. And even when I was about sort of 15, 16, I got my Saturn originally when I was 16th birthday. And I remember going into I think we went into Curry's, and the Saturn was already on the way out. This was probably 97, and it was a few days before Diana died, when that's my birthday, and they didn't stock it, so we had to go into Electronics Boutique to get the Saturn. And I remember the guy saying, "I'll get a PlayStation," which, you know, I suppose in hindsight would have probably been the smartest thing to do. But yeah, I don't regret it. Then a couple of years later, obviously the Dreamcast comes out, and yeah, I mean, you were sort of playing games, you know, on the Saturn and the Dreamcast that no one else was. It was almost like an exclusive club. You know, it's weird because all my mates, they loved Sega Rally back in the arcades, but yet they all crapped on the Saturn version because they all had PlayStations. And it's like, when you play them, they're near enough, you know, it's as close as you could have got to an arcade perfect port on the sort of console, really. So yeah, I mean, it's weird how, you know, us of a certain age group kind of have grown up with it, really, isn't it? It's very sort of intrinsic to our sort of upbringing, I think, really, and I think that's where a lot of the nostalgia sort of comes from, really. But yeah, so I mean, where did I mean, obviously it's a big undertaking in terms of getting every single magazine. Where did the sort of dedicate? I mean, obviously people go full set collecting, but to try and get full magazine collecting, that's a big kind of ask, isn't it? I mean, because you really are delving into, like, you know, some unique kind of titles and, like you say, obscure stuff, really, aren't you? And eBay, I guess, is really your only kind of source in that respect, isn't it?
Yeah, we've tried all sorts of tactics on eBay as well. We've gone to real extremes. We've sort of, people that are selling Mega Drive, Saturns, Dreamcast consoles, we've sent them cheeky messages, you know, the ones that sell in the big bundles, sort of saying, have you by any chance got any magazines as well? Anything else that you might like to get rid of? And we found some that way. We've also put stupidly priced bounties on the ones we need as well. So we offer £50 for any of the magazines that we need on our list. That's gone up double over the years. We started off at £25, but of course over the years, as magazines and the value of retros gone up, so we've sort of had to put the bounty up as well to get people looking. So by getting people to be our eyes and ears and sort of saying, right, 50 quid if you can go and get us this lot, we're then getting people all over the country looking at car boots, for example. A lot of the fellow traders at the gaming events that I attend, some of them have come up trumps for us as well.
Yeah.
So we've sort of had to expand. One story and this one is unbelievable. So I don't quite go this far, but Matt actually went through the classified ads back in the day. So he'd go through Mean Machines, Sega, Megatech, and he'd look in the classified ads, and he would actually write to the people that had written in back in the day, really? In the hope that some of them still lived at the address, and it did turn up dividends.
Really?
All right, we didn't get a lot of responses, but there was the odd 102 had sort of said, "Oh yeah, I remember 30 years ago writing in that magazine. Now I can't really help you there." But yeah, so that sort of gives you an idea of the extremes we've gone to previously, just to sort of get a heads up on some of the magazines. The other thing we do, you look at collectors of certain things, so Sonic collectors, Tomb Raider collectors. Chances are, if they've got merchandise, they may also have a magazine or two. We got a few issues of Saturn Plus that way. Had Tomb Raider on the cover. So yeah, we've sort of had to think outside the box, other than simply going on. I mean, my algorithm and Matt's algorithm on eBay is nuts in terms of what we have saved search wise. But yeah, we've had to really think outside the box to pick other magazines up. Yeah,
I can imagine. So how do you collate in terms of the data, in terms of knowing the type of magazines that were about at that time? Because obviously some of them only went for less than 5 issues, didn't they? There's some really obscure ones that really only lasted a couple of months. And how do you kind of, is it just through searching online or looking, you know, people in the industry? I guess it's kind of a bit of a thankless task, really, isn't it?
It can be. People in the industry, to be fair, the guys have been great. We've spoken to so many of them, but a lot of them don't always remember back to the day. So there's a certain publication company called Maverick who gobbled up a lot of the Mega Drive magazines in the mid-90s and proceeded to turn them into pamphlet specials. Now, you speak to the guys that work on them, and they were working on that many of them at the time that they can't remember. It was a bit of a blur to them. we went down to the London Library, British Library, back in 2010, and by literally sitting and looking through, it was Computer Trade Weeklies and other sort of almost Bible encyclopedia type things that carried sort of magazine publications. We found one from there which happened to be called Mega Machines. That's a really bizarre magazine if you ever come across it, because you read it vertically instead of horizontally.
Oh, really?
So we found that through there, but there isn't a lot in terms of what they have. So I mean, we quite naively thought we could go down to the library, say, "What have you got?" and they'd show us sort of a vault full of gaming magazines, and there was next to nothing. So what we're ultimately going to do is donate. So we're both collecting sets because we're nuts like that. Matt is going to eventually digitize his stuff and then send it all down to the library so that future generations can enjoy. And I'm going to keep my physical copies, so we'll have a physical copy and a digicopy. But it was disappointing at the lack of information we got when we went down there. We spent a good 3 or 4 hours there, but there was just no information, which of course makes it a lot harder. I dare say there's the information we've got at Sega Mags that nobody else knows currently. But equally, there may be people out there that've got information that we need. So yeah, it was disappointing, but that's the sort of battle plan going forward.
Well, I suppose at the time, I mean, it's like anything, isn't it? When you're kids and you're young, you don't think about the long-term effects. And I think as well, there's so many nuggets of information that were probably rumours at the time, or things that were confirmed, that have maybe been lost in those the first few pages of the news sections of each magazine. And I suppose if it wasn't for guys like you actually collating it and being able to kind of document it, it would be kind of lost to the passage of time, really, wouldn't it? It would be almost forgotten about. And it's strange how, people value comic books, in terms of like a fiction. But it seems like magazines are disposable, aren't they? They're not. They don't have that kind of. People will put a magazine in the bin once it's read. Whereas a comic is much more kind of, they keep hold of it for much longer, don't they? There's much more kind of, I don't know what you'd say, maybe a tangibleness to it.
Yeah, and your ultimate problem is, of course, the magazines we're now going after, the rare ones, are the ones that were literally 30-odd pages worth of pamphlet reprints, and nobody in the right mind really would have kept them. Parents would have seen them on the shelves in WH Smith and sort of said, "Not buying that, it's not worth it." And people that did end up with them would probably have binned them and thought, "Nothing in this." I remember back in the day when my dad stopped buying me Mega, it was for that reason. I remember him coming home one day with a copy of Sega Power, as it happens, saying, "Right, we're not getting you Mega anymore. There's only about 30-odd pages in. It looks crap. That's it." Obviously, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Had he carried on buying me, I could have been sat on a full set of them now. But back in the day, of course, and it's the sort of parent mentality thing. So when we're asking, we've had people in the past that have sort of gone up in lofts and said, "We've not got anything you'll want. We've only got this crap thing here," and they show you it, and it's like, "Oh, actually, this is one we need." There were a waste of money back then because of the price and the page count, and of course now the rarer than hen's teeth. So it's a bit yin yang that, but that makes it much more difficult. Saturn and Dreamcast era much easier because you knew when the magazines had finished. By that point, there were primitive websites. A lot of the magazines told you they were ending. But of course, back in the 90s, you didn't have the internet. You didn't know what was going on then. So that's where we're at, and it's those sort of pamphlet specials that are the problem.
Yeah, well, I remember back in the day that when I was a kid, that certainly like the Sega magazines, the Mega Drive kind of era, was like the Wild West, really. You used to get there was a real disparaging quality in terms of like the official stuff and your Mean Machines to, like you say, your pamphlet style kind of 30 pages. I think when the Saturn, I would say the PlayStation era, it kind of brought a level of professionalism to that. It was probably maybe missing before, I guess, and it become much more kind of structured, in terms of how the magazines were laid out and the glossy covers, rather than the Mega Drive era, really. So I suppose it's like anything, it's a maturing industry really at that time, isn't it? So I mean, I'm gonna have to ask, what has been the sort of hardest magazine to find in the collection, I guess?
So it's almost certainly the Mega Drive ones, but there is a Saturn one. So I'm probably going to say Saturn. There's a magazine called Saturn Plus, which burnt very, very quickly. We believe there's only 6 or 7. Well, we know there's 7 issues of it. There could have been an 8th because there was a next month page, but that particular magazine will have had a low print run from the start. And after 2 issues, so your first issue was about 68 pages, second issue was about 100, but it had the first issue within it. And from the issue 3, we were fairly confident it had gone pamphlet. We've never seen issue 3, but we know 4, 5, 6, and 7 are 32 pages. So that particular magazine, so we've never seen issue 3. We haven't got a clue what's on the film, but we have got 4, 5, 6, and 7 between us. And 7 does hold hope that there may have been an 8.
Yeah.
I think it was Computer Trade Weekly or MVC or MCV. Matt's got a load of them. He managed to source, which were pretty good at telling you when some publications had closed. And Saturn Plus was actually touted as being closed about issue 2. But we found a website on Wayback which told us the publication dates were 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we then sort of went and found them. So whether or not there was an 8, but as I'm going to reveal tonight with you guys, there was, we sort of had what we thought was a really good algorithm as to when magazines finished, which was blown out the water a few months ago when we came across another one. So yeah, I'm going to say Saturn Plus purely because of the market at the time and the fact that it was killed pretty quickly.
Yeah, much like Saturn.
It was. I mean, credit, there was, we had 4 Saturn magazines at the time. Only one of them went for a great length of time. We know, of course, that was Sega Saturn magazine. Total Saturn came and went. Saturn Plus came and went. Saturn Power, of course, was converted from Sega Power, and that was pretty much it. So yeah, Saturn Plus is definitely the one that was burned the quickest. Is the hardest for us to sort of get hold of.
Yeah, I mean, I remember buying Saturn Power and the official Sega Saturn magazine, and I remember Dean and Rich Ledbetter really trying to fight the fight when it come to, almost stemming the tide against the sort of PlayStation, and it must have been for those guys, I suppose, almost like just going from month to month, really, not knowing if your magazine's going to survive long term, isn't it? Really, I mean, the official Sega Saturn magazine did put a good show in. I think the last 6 issues or so were pretty much just, it almost become a Dreamcast magazine, because it kind of coincided with the Dreamcast coming or being announced, really, and it was really bizarre because at the time you had obviously the official magazine, but they were covering imports. So if you go through the last few issues, they're reviewing things like obviously King of Fighters '98 and Symphony of the Night, stuff that is, you'd never see the light of day in terms of the UK market, but I guess they had nothing else to write about, really. So it's just that dragging it out as long as it possible, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, Sega Saturn magazine was a strange one towards the end because if you've read it, you'll know that in the lead up to its demise, they were actually talking about it transforming into a new magazine. So I think it was about issue 33, 34. Rich was sort of saying, we're not going anywhere, we're going to transform. What ultimately happened is was a bit left field, of course. EMAP lost the rights to the official title. Dennis then took it on for the official Dreamcast magazine, which resulted in EMAP closing the magazine quite quickly. And then, they washed their hands. They didn't have any Dreamcast publications at all. Dave Kelsall, the art editor, has been really good with us. He's hopefully going to be showing us a couple of sort of magazine covers that have never been released into the wild before, if he can find the stuff on his hard drive. But he has shown us and a few other publications the dummy issue of the official one that they pitched to Sega, which was very similar actually to Dennis's. I think ultimately, so you'll know, having read Sega Saturn magazine, it was very edgy at the time. So although it was an official magazine, they weren't afraid to criticise, they weren't afraid to sort of slag things off. And Sega ultimately wanted a family-friendly magazine, which is where the Dennis ODM came in. Credit to Sega Saturn magazine for that. I liked the fact that they were honest, often sort of going against Sega. I remember when Sega, they had this 5-point plan for passing games. They had to meet a 5-star criteria. And it ultimately led to games. There was a really cool snowboarding game called Chill that never got released, but Courier Crisis did. and that's not one of the finest moments on the Saturn. So,
No.
yeah, credit to SSM for going as long as they did, to be fair, and for flying that flag. And even towards the end, we had, I mean, Dean will hopefully forgive me for saying this, but they had two of the best demo discs you'll ever see. Panzer Dragoon Saga Disc 1, which led to me getting Panzer Saga, and the Christmas Nights disc. I still have that in my collection. I remember seeing that in a branch of Sainsbury's somewhere and picking it up and thinking, I've got to have this. So yeah, got to give them full credit, as you say, for going on as long as they did, despite the fact they were down to reviewing sort of Capcom Generations Volume 5 and some obscure Konami classics. Yeah.
I remember watching Rich Ledbetter on, obviously he does Digital Foundry now, and he was doing like a live audience with John Linneman, and he was saying that I think he said that he pitched to Sega about doing Panzer Dragoon Disc 1, and they thought he was nuts. But you think in hindsight, it was a masterstroke, really, because even though the game is, it's like a unicorn, getting that out has kind of added to the mystique of the game. Certainly, I think in the West, because that was an easy way to dip your toe in the water in terms of getting the first disc, experiencing it. I mean, you can kind of crack through it in a couple of hours anyway, but it was a bit of a masterstroke, really, and really, really works fantastically well. It's quite funny. I've got many of the demos from Sega Sat Magazine and Sega Powered, and one thing that stands out to me is that they seem to suffer from disc rot a lot quicker than the officially pressed games. I don't know if it's because they're put together very quickly or something else, but they seem to suffer very, very quickly from disc rot. I mean, I've got probably about 7 discs upstairs that just don't read if you put them in the console. So I suppose the pressing was quite quick in terms of getting it done, bish bash bosh, and getting it out for the next issue, really, rather than go through an actual game, really. But yeah, fantastic magazine.
I guess it might have been a cost thing. Yeah, it might have been a cost thing as well, because of course it was when we bought these demo disc issues, of course the price was moved up to coincide with it, and I'm guessing there might have been a sort of bit of shaving there to sort of keep the cost down, so we weren't being charged £10 for a demo disc magazine, perhaps something like that.
Yeah, and again, the demos now, I mean, certainly on the PlayStation, they're really collectible. I know that the people like the full set because they're numbered, aren't they? So it kind of goes into that thing to collect a full set for, isn't it? Really, it's I suppose it isn't it? Anything from the nostalgia is always highly valued, isn't it? Really. So I'm just going to go to a few of the comments, Mark, because we've been on for 20 minutes, and apologies if I haven't got back to anyone yet. So first comment is we've got Griffo's Retro Gaming, dirty black and white bar staff. Great to see you, Mark.
I love you too, Alex. You know that.
So we've got Pete.
That's a rugby comment. That's a rugby.
Oh, is it? Oh, is it? Oh, yeah, because you're Hull, aren't you?
Yeah. So I am. So I'm the black and white side, Hull FC, and I know Alex is a Hull KR fan. Many times on a gaming market, he's come up to me singing Red Red Robin for no reason whatsoever, and he generally goads me. So I'll take that with a pinch of salt and just say I love you, Alex.
I see. Was it Australia won the World Championships, didn't they? I think they beat Samoa, didn't they?
Yes. Yeah, Rugby League World Cup final. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So we've got Pete. Have fun, guys. So hope you're well, Pete. Shame you couldn't be with us tonight. Maybe next time. We've got your colleagues, Sega Powered Magazine.
Evening. Hopefully they've not written any comments about me being sacked yet, so that's a good start.
I'm sure they haven't. So we've got Champion 2D Rob, big guy.
Evening.
Yeah. Griffo. Obviously we've got who else? Retro Chef, the chef from Essex. Always catch Lee on the swap shop. I think I'll be joining him this weekend. No, next weekend, 27th. So it'll be good to do that. So Rob again. So he says I threw out all my Mean Machine Sega mags many years ago. I say threw them out, but really I put them outside and someone took them. Yeah, that's crazy, man. That's probably I don't know, what does a Mean Machine Sega go for now? £10, £15 each? Easily, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so The first two issues always surprise me with the value, because people always see first issues as being rare, but they're not always. I know that the original Mean Machine Sega issue 1 had a massive print run because they went really big on it. The issues that tend to be rarer, so around issue 38, they became, so as Sega magazine was born, they actually became the official Mega Drive magazine. So they changed the logo to the official Sega logo. So that was around issue 38, and all the way up to issue 53, as it started to focus on the Saturn as well. They tend to be the rare issues, the harder to find ones. When I'm collecting stock to sell at gaming events, it's always, they're the ones that are always asked for, basically, the ones sort of in that type of era. So 96, 97, probably the later issues,
Yeah, it's like anything, isn't it? It's always going to be the last of the run, isn't it, really, I guess. So, yeah, naturally, Rob is saying big regret. And we've got your friend of mine, Scott, Sega Zombie. So, yeah, hope you're well, mate. All good, all good. So that brings us up to... Sorry, go on, Mark.
We're featuring Scott's shop in a couple of issues' time. So we're quite big on Sega Powered in supporting the indie shops. I went down to see him probably about a couple of months ago now, and we'll be featuring his shop in a future issue, yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, locally, I mean, I'm in Essex, so we've, everyone's heard of the Retro Hunter. So we've got that very, very close to us in Southend, and then in Basildon we've got a smaller place called Miso Retro Games. So again, it's nice to have two local places, because retro shops, you don't really find too many of them, really, is there? So it's nice to have a couple local, and it's always nice to kind of see what they've got and support the local scene, really. So that'd be really good. Good to see you down in Scott. So I did see a picture of you in on Facebook with Scott. I guess that was the reason why.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, we're sort of, because we're big on the indie scene in Sega Powered in terms of the games and the hard-working developers who spend a lot of time on them, we want to market it. And all right, we've got the big wigs, we've got the CXs, we've got the games, but we want to support those guys that literally go alone. And there's so many of these indie shops that don't get the love that they deserve. So Retro Hunter, for example, I love Ali to bits. I've met him a few times. I'm hoping to catch up with him soon. I know he's just having a big refurbishment of the shop, so I've sort of left him alone for a bit. Scott, I surprised. So I sort of like doing a little bit, almost like a Noel Edmonds type thing, where I sort of turn up at a random retro shop and go and surprise them and then say, do you want to be in the magazine? I'm planning on doing that a few more times next year and just sort of dropping in on random shops. But yeah, we welcome anybody. If anybody wants to advertise their indie shop, we'll get you in for an interview, and we'll sort of get you the love you deserve, because these guys are the ones that work hardest. And for me, I mean, the indie scene, it's such a labour of love, and for very little often as well, because you're competing. I mean, we know that CX has changed the landscape with a lot of the retro stuff. So to have these indie guys out there and the ones that are surviving, for me, I'm all up for giving them the love they deserve.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you were to own your own retro shop, I mean, that is a real. I mean, first of all, it takes a lot of cojones to do it. I think going any rule in anyway, self-employed. And I mean, I know Ali personally, and I know he had quite a very good position when he was in London, and I think he said that he just decided he couldn't do it anymore, just wanted to out and start the passion project. So I think anyone who goes that way, deserves real credit. So I think, good on Scott for doing that as well. I was actually hoping to go up there next week and see him, so I have to text him and see if he's still on for that. But yeah, should be, always support those little guys. So we've got Sega Powered magazine again. So yet ...
Yeah,
I think that might have been about the cover. I think. Then we've got Griffith's Retro Gaming Laughing. Obviously, I guess that's whole related.
He knows.
We got Cy, Ginger Hippie. So hello, Cy. Hope you're well, mate. Scott's a great shop. So yeah, he certainly does. So it brings us up to date, really. So I wanted to ask as well. So I mean, I remember when I was a kid, there was obviously Sonic the comic. So from your point of view, do you class that as a magazine? Because I know that, I mean, I listened to the Sonic the Hedgehog comic podcast, and they talk about the difficulty in terms of the later issues with that, where that was almost like the last kind of was like. I mean, yeah, the Dreamcast was out, but that was like the last kind of link to that Sega of, you know, the better times really. And also, I know that they've said that the fold-out posters, they're very, very hard to find as well. So have you got a full set of them as well?
No, it's not something we've gone after. We've had to be really careful in sort of sticking to UK Sega magazines and Sega magazines alone, because once you go down the rabbit hole of other things, and I have, I've started encroaching into PlayStation magazines, Nintendo magazines as well. So we've had to set a clear goal with Sega mags and just sort of say, right, these are the magazines. We can't then encroach into, say, Sonic the Comic. We can't encroach into any other, because there were quite a few. And there were a lot of one-off comic publications as well, like Eternal Champions, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I remember, so I collected Sonic the Comic up until, I think it was all the way through or around about the Saturn era. I remember them doing reviews of Saturn games at the sort of beginning of the comic before you went on and read it. And I remember I think there was a Streets of Rage comic strip and things like that. I don't remember it in Extreme Cast years, but I'm guessing at that point, again, like with magazines, the circulation had gone down quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I think towards the end of Sonic the Comic, they only used to produce so many new strips. I think they did a lot of rehashes towards the end with just the odd one or two new strips, which of course meant that people were probably thinking, I've already got this, that's not really worth it. Perhaps the same rabbit hole as the magazines ultimately went down.
Yeah, I suppose it's like game collecting, really, isn't it? I mean, again, more power to any kind of guy who's got, I think, first of all, the financial facility of going out and spending, however much on anything really, in terms of Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, Sega. But you do have to, I think if you're not in that position, you do need to be very frugal, and you do need to be, you need to be aware of what you're purchasing, I guess. And it comes with, there's a discipline to it, really, isn't there? And I suppose it's much the same for yourself in terms of the magazine collecting. You think, that subset might be nice, or this subset might be nice, but I suppose just keep it on the straight and narrow, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it always makes me smile because gaming's very similar, and the amount of money you have to pay for a lot of crap shovelware and things like that. There's a PlayStation game. It's like Cindy's Fashion World or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah,
people need it for the completion purposes, but it goes for crazy money, and you sort of think it's a crap game. But for those that want to complete, and it's the same with us as magazines. We're down to crap magazines, but we're that desperate for them. And the majority that we now collect will have next to nothing in them. But it's a completion thing, isn't it? And once you sort of set that goal, I know there's quite a few sellers that a lot of collectors over the years that have given up, haven't they? And they've simply sold up because they don't believe they're ever going to get them. But it does make me smile that it's the shovelware and the rubbish, the ones, the things that were probably left on the shelf back then in the cellophane wrapper, that are now fetching sort of the biggest money.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I remember when I had the Master System, there was only one Master System magazine, and you'll know what it's called. I think is it Master?
Sega Master Force, yeah.
Yeah, and I only ever got one issue, and it was the one with the Sonic the Comic. Sorry, not the Sonic Chaos front cover. And I think that's the only Master System magazine that I'm kind of aware that exists, really. Everything was always focused on either Sega in general or just Mega Drive, really. But I mean, is that quite difficult to come by as well? Because I suppose at the time the Master System was its updates as well.
Yeah, it can be. We're lucky we've got the full set. I'm going to have to try and get this right now. I think there was 6 issues of Sega Master Force. So effectively, you had a magazine called Sega Force that split into 2 parts: Sega Force Mega, which was the Mega Drive, and Sega Master Force, before ultimately closing and turning into Mega Machines, actually. They can be a little bit rarer to find. I mean, we're lucky we've got the full set, and I have since. I mean, I've managed to get a few upgrades to the collection as well. So you're right. In terms of when I think about Sega Force and Sega Force Mega, I've seen them more than I have Sega Master Force. You're also right. It was the only dedicated Master System magazine that there ever was. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we'll probably come on to Sega Powered now. And I mean, my first question is, I mean, obviously, I've watched the Sega guys, so shout out to them, fantastic guys they are, and they had is it Dean and Neil on, And they went into detail in terms of how the magazine got started and, you know, the kind of what they did before. But from your point of view, how did you find the magazine getting started, and how did you kind of get involved with it, really? Because obviously those guys are from a journalistic background, aren't they? I mean, I don't know if you are as well, but it's
not particularly. I mean, I did a bit of strange radio work back in the early noughties while I was at university, but that was as exciting as I got. But I have got an English with creative writing degree, so my ultimate goal. So when I left uni in 2006 with that degree, I always wanted to go into print media. The problem back then was, as 2006 rolled around, print media was dying. Everything was going online, and it sort of left me thinking, do you know what? I would have been better off probably going into computing instead. As it happened, during the pandemic, of course, when people were at home, print started to come back in. People were at home, they had nothing to do, they were reading more. What we effectively found, so Dean and Neil were two people that I read their stuff from cover to cover. So I was a massive fan of Sega Power, and I was a massive fan of Saturn Power. I'm privileged enough to still have my entire collection of Saturn Power as new. So I knew of Dean because every now and again, I should say, of course I know Dean, and it was the same with Neil. So DC UK, I read that from cover to cover. How it came about with me, so I very often would get in touch with, so for Sega Mag's purposes, I'd spoken to Dean a few times, sort of saying, right, I'm going to do a feature on Saturn Power issue 4. Can you remember if you got anything you can tell me? And then when we did the story on it, we would say, you know, Dean remembers that in issue 4, they worked hard to get this disc, they couldn't get it, so they saved it for issue 5, that sort of thing. So when he got in touch with me in 2020, was it 20? No, it was last. Every year rolls into one. It would have been last year, and said to me, "Are you interested in becoming part of a magazine? You know, I want to bring print media back." It was a no-brainer for me. Having read the works of both him and Neil, and and idolised them back in my youth, to then be asked by Dean, who for me he's never really lost that sort of journalistic bug. I remember the last issue of Saturn Power. In fact, I teased it on a lot of Facebook groups last year, where the closure on the editorial page, he'd put sort of, hey, let's do it again sometime. And I sort of always held out hope that he would, but to be asked to be part of Sega Powered, it was a no-brainer for me. It was a straight yes. Paul Monaghan I already knew, and I also knew Neil as well, which helped. So yeah, it was basically just sort of 4 guys getting together, 2 journalists from back in the day with the experience. Paul, who, he lives and breathes magazines as well. He's had a lot of journalists on his Maximum Power Up podcast over the years. And me, of course, with my encyclopedia of Sega knowledge, seemed a perfect fit. So it was an honour to be asked, and I'm proud to be part of such a fantastic team, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, I suppose it kind of adds kudos to, the work that you're doing, really, for those guys to sort of, see you in that light, really, in that degree. So I think more power to you. I think what you guys have produced is, it's fantastic. It is, it's quite amazing that in this day and age there is that kind of desire to have that, that physical magazine still going, isn't there? I mean, I would sooner buy a copy of Sega Powered than Retro Gamer, because I mean, to me, I enjoy Retro Gamer, but I think like any retro game, there's things that you're not interested in, and to me, if I buy it, it's always dictated to what they've got on the front cover. So if it's something from the early times, I'm not going to buy it, and if it's something say like Xbox, PS2 onwards, I'm probably not going to buy it. So there's a certain kind of window that I would buy it, really. But yeah, I mean, it's quite ironic that the only kind of gaming magazine going now is a retro gaming one. I think there's a PlayStation one still going as well. I know the official license has dried up as well for it.
Yeah, they've rebranded as Play, which is strange because there was a Play many moons ago, but I knew that Future had the rights to that ultimately because they took on, I think it was Imagine Publishing, the last incarnation of them. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty much exactly the same as the official PlayStation magazine, just without the tag. And I think they've got to the stage now where, I mean, we looked into sort of official business with Sega Powered, and the license fees, you sort of look at it and you think, we'll stay unofficial. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it was the same. Sony probably wanted a massive chunk of money, and they've realised with the readership, it's not worth it. Let's just go independent. I prefer it. I prefer unofficial publications because you can be a lot more honest. I mean, back in the days of the official PlayStation magazine, I dare say that they were probably strangled to some extent in terms of, we'll give you these discs, but don't you dare say this about the magazines, about the reviews. So I think, being independent is much, much better. For us, we're really, really privileged because we sort of delve into the past and the present. So in terms of, because Sega's sort of a relic that, rather, as you say, with Retro Gamer, they're now at the stage where they've been going that long that the Wii, for example, is now classified as retro. Whereas, with the Sega consoles, unless Sega ever dream up an original console, that the Dreamcast, the Saturn, the Mega Drive, Master System, they're always going to be sort of those relics left in the 90s. But what we've found, I mean, I've really enjoyed talking to the indie developers and publishers as well, and there is so much goodness coming out still for the Dreamcast and the Mega Drive in particular. It's allowed us to evolve into, I mean, when we first sort of thought the idea of Sega Powered, it was primarily going to be re-reviewing old games, but there's that much content coming out as well. It's allowed us to branch into new Sega titles, new indie titles, and I mean, there's one game that's due out next year, Driving Strikers, and you think online Dreamcast gaming in 2023, it's like, wow, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I went to the London gaming market last weekend, and I was chatting to the guy who was working for Wave Studios, and he was saying that what they've got lined up for the next year, and he said that there was always the big kind of Dreamcast indie scene, but they kind of just brought a level of professionalism to it. And
I've lost sound on you. I don't know if you can still hear me, but I've lost sound on you, Scott.
Oh, can you hear me now? Oh dear.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Hear me okay?
Yeah. I'll sort of, I can't hear you at all now for some reason.
Oh.
So I'll ad-lib a little bit until we sort of get you back. But basically with Sega Powered, the past, present and future, as Paul likes to say, that's pretty much where we're at with the magazine.
Okay, can you hear me now, Mark?
No, I still can't hear you at all now, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Can everybody else hear you? Is it just me that can't hear you now?
Anyone else hear me? Technicalities. Can you hear me now, Mark?
I'll log off the feed. If you just send me the link back on, and was it worth trying to sort of come back on and see if that rectifies it?
Yeah. All right, we'll try that. I'll send you the link again. Okay, guys, let me know. Okay, can you hear me now, Rob? Give us a thumbs up if you can, man. It's all on. Can you hear me now? That's the unbelievable school. That might be better. Right, let me just send Mark another link. Okay, must be Mark then. Sorry about this, guys. Where's that coming from then? Might be because I'm by myself. Try and get another one.
Right, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, I still can't hear you. And I don't know why.
I think these guys can hear me though, Mark. Let me
just try something in a minute. Can you hear me now? I can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I'm going to put it down to something must have happened with my Galaxy Bud speakers, so I'll just talk without the headphones on if you can hear me well enough.
All right, hold on. Let me just.
Yeah, so I can't hear you without the headphones on, weirdly. Have you muted your microphone, Scott? Because I've got you. I can see your microphone on my side with a mute. Yeah. And now I still can't hear you, weirdly. I could hear you when you had the headphones on for that brief moment. That's really weird. So my speakers are all right here. That's bizarre, that. Especially if you can still hear me all right. Yeah, still can't hear you. That's really weird. Yeah, I can't understand why your microphone's on mute for me for some weird reason.
Can you hear me now, Mark?
Yes, I can. I can hear you now.
Right. We will just go by the camera. Right. Apologies. God, come on.
We need to play like a little musical interlude, don't we?
Look at this level of professionalism, mate.
That's it. It's always the case with live streams, isn't it? There's always something. And of course, in the end, I mean, technology. I've got a £100 pair of headphones that seem to just stop working.
Really?
So yeah. Oh well.
Yeah, sorry about that. So we'll bin them, get rid of them.
We'll just talk like normal human beings, and like a social conversation without the need for the headphones and the ear pods or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, the big Rob. It's all gone pear-shaped.
It's all gone pear-shaped. Technology, it's wonderful when it works, and it's crap when it doesn't, basically. That's why you need print media. So let's just get it out there, right? Digital magazines and all that, you don't want to read it online. This is how it should be. Print never goes wrong. So, well, unless you put a spelling mistakes in there, but we don't talk about that anyway. So there you go.
Yeah, there is that. Apologies, Mark. Like I said, first time, so technicalities. We can edit it out.
Oh yeah, when the replay goes out, it'll be like none of this ever happened, and we'll just sort of
100%.
You can superimpose some headphones onto me, and we'll just pretend it all went really smoothly. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, mate. So you were saying in relation to how you got involved with the magazine as such. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it must have been. I know that
when I was listening to the Sega guys, Dean said that he couldn't believe it that Sega Mania was coming out as well, literally at the same time. And it is so true that there hasn't been any kind of activity in that sort of space, and then two come along at once, really. So, I mean, I definitely think there's obviously a market for both you guys, but it's such a shame those guys have had to close it down, really. But I suppose it shows that it's a fine line you tread, isn't it, in terms of keeping your heads above water to a degree, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really tough. So we'd worked out that since we had the idea of the magazine last year, that print costs, everything's gone through the roof this year.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Sega Mania, they had their sort of niche where they were going through the years. It just so happens that while we were talking about launching Sega Powered, they launched Sega Mania, and it threw us a bit left field. And of course, you know, when we announced that we were also entering the market, I'm assuming it threw them a little bit as well. Yeah, in terms of Sega Mania, it was a shame because, you know, variety is indeed the spice of life. They sort of had they went through the years and they were very retro based. We were sort of cutting edge in terms of going new and old and sort of sprinkling it all in. I mean, you know, I'm not going to lie, there isn't any magazine rather with. I'm really good friends with Tim, and I did speak to him afterwards. They're behind the Fantastic Sega Magazine's website, which is still running. And I have offered my help with that. I've sort of said, you can use my encyclopedia brain if you want. I can help with that. So, yeah, there was nothing sort of sinister about it. They just closed. It's a shame. And we've got to now sort of fly the flag for Sega magazines, and we've got to make sure that we just keep ploughing on. We've launched a really cool annual on Kickstarter, which is currently ongoing. That's nearly hit its target. Some of the freebies, I mean, Christmas wrapping paper and Will Overton prints. You know, we're quite. I mean, Dean will tell you that I'm a horrible Christmas person. I start celebrating Christmas and talking about Christmas in October. It drives the guys nuts. So to have Christmas wrapping paper with Sega Powered on it is right up my street. The whole family will get things wrapped with Sega Powered Christmas paper this year. So yeah, we've got that. Issue 7 is just about to drop as well. We've got that currently on our Twitter and Discord page. We have sort of revealed the cover for that. It is a Sonic themed one because it's going to have a review of Sonic Frontiers in. Dean has played the game to death already, ready to give a review for that. So we'll have a really in-depth review of a new game, which is really, really cool. I'm currently working on a few Saturn games for inclusion in future issues as well. So as with print magazines, although issue 7 is still sort of warming up, I'm already starting work on issue 8. And I've been given some lovely Saturn rub of the green, the Saturn being my favourite console. So I've got a couple of really cool re-reviews coming up for the Saturn as well. But yeah, we're just, you know, we've got to go into 2023. We're going to look at doing a lot of gaming events. I'm going to sort of take Sega Mags to a few more markets. We're going to spread the team around a little bit, hopefully to meet some new people. And it's just about getting the word out. It's strange, and I'm guessing, you know, the Sega Mania guys had the same thing. It's amazing how many people still don't know you exist. You know, I've got friends that I've sold magazines to over the years that have just sort of come up to me and said, "Oh, I didn't realise you'd launched an annual. I didn't realise you'd Sega Power was the thing." So that's really, we're going to do a big sort of advertising push next year to get the word out, and you know, with the help of people such as yourself, the gaming groups, the shops, hopefully we can get the word far and wide, and you know, and keep Sega Power going for a long time to come. We're all really proud of the magazine. We hope the readers love it as well. The debates we have every single month, from the cover to what goes in it to the news stories. You know, deadline week is really hectic for us. Well, not particularly for me, but Dean. You know, he'll show us 48, 50 variants of covers, and I don't lie when I say that. He's got art editor Kate literally building issues up polygon by polygon on the front. It really is. I mean, hopefully in the annual we'll sort of show a few of the covers that never were, so to speak. The arguments, the debates, the sort of the love that we have when we finally release the issue. Every issue we release, you just look at it and just know that we spent ages debating what to put on the cover and sort of how to have it.
I think it's funny you bring up the cover, because I think one thing that has always really impressed me was the kind of, I mean, it's a unique kind of cover, isn't it? It's not, I mean, especially this Jackie one. I think it was you that said that this has been designed by you know, like you say, your art editor, but it's done by, this isn't an in-game photograph, and it isn't a you know, isn't a Sega kind of, you know, press release. It's all been very customized by you guys, isn't it, really? And I think that's what really makes it kind of stand out.
Yeah, so we've sort of, you know, we've done the Requiem, we've found fan artwork, we've found other bits and bobs, and we've sort of interspersed a lot of it together to build up what you see there. So there's 2 or 3 different sort of images that we looked at, and then we've sort of put them all together and gone, right, let's see what this will look like built up. And the result, you know, really was fantastic. It's not just a copy and paste job, and the work that Kate does, you know, I was privileged enough to see it in bits as it was being built up, and I think we did on the Twitter page, we did sort of show a little bit of that. But yeah, the covers, the fact we've got Will Overton on board again coming up, so he's designing, the cat's out the bag for that now, he's designing our issue 8 Nights cover. The guys will tell you that fairly early on in the year, when we were talking about sort of Christmas, January issues, 2 things came into my head: Nights and Will Overton, and it was just, I sort of, if that was a dream come true for me, to have Will producing a Nights cover, and it was something I wanted on the front anyway. So yeah, I'm really, really excited about that. Willie's working on it as we speak, and you know, we can't wait to unleash that. That's going to be a pretty cool cover, I'm fairly certain.
Yeah, definitely. Do you find that it is obviously a drive to get the magazine known? I mean, are the numbers? Do you find it growing month on month? Is it? I suppose it's working out, isn't it?
What we tend to find is that once people know about us, they go hell for leather on the back issues. So we've had to do a lot of reprinting in recent months, because there'll always be people that will get in touch and they'll say, "Oh, yeah," because as we go back to completionists, actually, there'll be some people that will not buy the magazine unless they can have every issue. So we went through a run of having issue 4 out of stock and the original issue 1. Issue 4 was very popular because of the Will Overton cover, and there were people literally saying to us, "Look, we want to buy all this, we want to buy it, but we have to have them all." So it led us to doing a few print runs of them. Excuse me. And we've had the same this time round. So as issue 6 has launched, we're sort of getting people buying issues 1 to 6, which is really, really cool. And hopefully we'll keep those readers on board. That will be our challenge through 2023. We always take reader comments on board. We're always striving to be better. We're always thinking of new ideas. And ultimately, you know, we want to grow the readership. We want to be here for a long time to come. You know, Dean's been in the game for a dot number of years, as Neil. Yeah. Those guys are veterans. Me and Paul are still sort of youngsters when it comes to the magazine side of things.
Yeah.
And, you know, ultimately, I'm happy to be that part of journalism, and I want to go full-time freelance myself. So yeah, let's hope that we're around for a long time to come. Say there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline. There's a reason we called the demo disc number 1. We want to do more of them. You know, we're constantly looking at ways to improve. We're talking to indie publishing developers all the time. We've got some pretty big things in the works. So yeah, hopefully 2023 will be another successful year for Sega Powered, and we can keep flying the Sega flag, basically.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of kind of not so much the legalities, but are Sega aware of the magazine, or were they all right in terms of using it? Or they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, we've been pretty open and transparent with them. So we are on their Dean's part of their press release things now, so he's got access to that. I'm quite good friends with a few of the guys, the Sega Forever guy who does the channels there. I know him quite well. There's a lot of former writers and editors that are part of Sega now, such as Ryan King, who a lot of us know. So yeah, they are aware. We've been fully transparent. That the first thing we did was sort of go to Sega and say, look, we're going to be producing a magazine because we need their help. So for things like games, review codes, that sort of thing. So yeah, they are aware that we exist. And yeah, that's all good. We've always been honest with them.
Yeah, because what always surprises me with like the indie scene is the sort of usage of, you know, previous logos. I mean, I have Paprium, and the Mega Drive logo is plastered everywhere on it. And much like these Dreamcast Wave game studio releases, they also use the Dreamcast logo as well. So I suppose, you know, as long as they're happy with it. I mean, obviously, if it was Nintendo, then that would be shut down, you know, within.
Yeah. Sega have always been open and honest about that. I think that Wave now, if I remember correctly, the newer games don't have the logo on. And I think with the Mega Drive stuff now, because the Mega Drive was more a sort of wording than a logo, wasn't it? As long as you do not use the exact font. So we've done that. So with Sega Powered, you'll notice we don't have the official Sega font on there. Then Sega are quite happy with it. But equally, I know that if there is an issue, Sega, they're pretty amiable. They'll tell you first. As you quite rightly say, Nintendo tends to go in all guns blazing, and they'll sue your backsides off first for having Mario in any modded game. Whereas with Sega, you're very much more sort of you will be given a heads up first. Now I can't encroach on sort of the Wave side of things, but I do know that the Dreamcast logo I think has been removed on the newer stuff. So I'm guessing that maybe Sega said, right, not a problem. We don't mind your indie stuff, just don't use the logo. And I think it's the same with the Mega Drive games. You tend to find they're just variants of the Mega Drive logo, as long as you don't put the actual one on there. And I think some of the indie games I've played, they even go as far on the startup screens to say not licensed by Sega, as opposed to the old licensed by Sega Enterprises.
I think
we're very privileged with the Sega side of things that they, the indie scene, homebrew scene is thriving, and they seem to be okay with that.
Yeah, I think from, again, just referencing the London gaming market, I think the chap said that they had more issue with Numskull than Sega themselves, because Numskull have a lot of the official, branding in terms of obviously merchandise, really. So they were more of a hassle than, Sega really directly. So, which is understandable, but I suppose you've got to tread carefully, really, in that respect, haven't you? But
absolutely. I mean, ultimately, we will rely on Sega's help, and they've been very good with us. But we have to also make sure that we don't start copyright infringement and encroaching on their stuff. Because at the end of the day, it is their stuff. But yeah, so far, we've been absolutely fine, and we do work with Sega, so yeah, it's all good there.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. We'll just jump to this. We've got a question from Rob. So shout out to Champion 2D. If you don't know who Rob is, go to Rob recently did a podcast with Retro Crisis. Really, really good, Rob. Really enjoyed it. He goes into detail in terms of his journey with 2D games and what his aspirations are for the collection and going forward. But so Rob says, do you not think people who buy magazines today tend to get them as additions to their gaming memorabilia rather than as the main source of information?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, actually. So I know from Sega Mags that some people buy magazines literally by the covers. So I could tell you that in terms of magazines I sell well, Sonic covers, Resident Evil, Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid, main games like that, Tomb Raider's another one. You're quite right. I will have people that will come up to the Sega Mag stand and they will literally say, I don't even think they're interested in the magazine, but it's got the cover and they have it in the collection. So you'll see these big collections. I've got one with Theme Park, and I've got quite a lot of Theme Park front covers. So you are right. And, that's why we've been really careful in what we've put on the front of the magazine. So every month we're sort of thinking about a title that, I mean, don't get me wrong, the guys will hate me for saying that. I'd love to have a Theme Park cover. I'd love to have Swagman on the cover. Absolutely love that game. But we have to think about the greater audience. So things like Virtua Fighter, when we did the Virtua, Panzer Dragoon, Knights, covers that people can relate to. Yeah, there will be people that will buy. I've had a few people get in touch with me already that have said, I'll buy that issue because you're going to have Knights on the front cover. So you're right, very right in what you say. In terms of the source of information, we do have a lot of people that will still read the magazine for that as well. We've been a little bit different with the re-reviews. So we've sort of tried to freshen it up by reviewing it in 2022, as opposed to just going back to a game and saying, yes, it was good, yes, it was bad. So we've, Daytona was a prime example of that. Great game back in the day, but we all gave it a bit of a kicking in issue 1 because it just doesn't hold up now. Croc is another game. So I absolutely loved Croc back in the day. I still love it now, but my review on it, I had to play, the controls were clunky, the graphics were not quite as, and you have to sort of put that head on. So we're basically here. We're not here just to sort of review the old games as they were and go, yeah, that was good back then, it's good back now. We're now sort of saying what it's like in 2022. And for people that, it's the same with gamers. Some people will buy games just for the collection. Will they have a place in this fashion world? They might, but they're probably just going to shove it in the collection. And it's the same with what we do with the magazines. So yeah, you're right. There are people that get them as additions to game memorabilia. We know that, so we always try and put something pucker on the cover as opposed to something that people won't really be interested in.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. I think that there is. I think that people. There is obviously a demand for certain types of magazines. I mean, the ones that stand out is always Super Play. That seems to be one of the most sought after magazines. And again, I think a lot of it stems from that kind of niche anime kind of cover that it did at the time. I mean, I obviously wasn't a Nintendo kid, so I didn't really read it. But when you watch people or hear people talk about Super Play, that's the one that they seem to gravitate to if they're sort of serious Nintendo kind of kids, really.
Yeah, and that's why we got Will Overton over to the dark side, because a lot of his covers, Super Play is one of my best sellers for Sega Mags. It's a magazine that's always asked for. So it made sense for us when we started Sega Powered, can we get Will Overton to do a Sega one? Go on, can we? So those sort of covers. It's the same with your Crash and your Zaps, the late Oliver Frey, absolutely amazing artist. And some of the covers he did, I've sort of talked about because he did a few Sega Force ones as well. So I was aware of his artwork in the Sega side of it. So yeah, those unique covers rather than just plastering something on the front, they do draw crowds. And Super Play, is by far. So I think it's Super Play followed by Nintendo Magazine System in terms of what I get asked for. But Super Play is by far and away the one that everybody asks for from me.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. So thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate the very detailed answer there. So we've got Paul Moynihan. So that's how I see my magazine collection. I read more than I play. I think it's. I mean, I find that when I refer back to magazines, it's almost like going back to a different time, really, isn't it? Because you are reading it from the 90s or whenever, and it is that you've got to take that mindset on as well. So personally for me, I think read them as well. So we've got Rob as well. Retrospectives are great. Yeah, I would agree. Can't always be blinded by nostalgia, I think.
Really and we found that, as I say, the Daytona one, I was really worried. So the good thing with us is that we never confirm our verdicts first. So all four of us, when we send, so there'll be, for the 2-page and the 4-page reviews, there'll always be somebody that re-reviews the game, and then we'll chip in with our verdicts, and none of us ever read each other's. So I remember doing my verdicts. I think it was Neil that reviewed Daytona, and I was really worried. I sort of thought, oh no, here's me giving it an absolute smashing, saying it's nowhere near as good as it was. And then I found out that the other 3 guys agreed. That's the beauty of sort of us, whether or not that happened back in the magazine days. But yeah, none of us ever confer. We all sort of say our bit, and then we see each other's bits when it's published, basically. So my Croc review, I was probably the most generous on it because it still holds a place in my heart. But a couple of the other guys absolutely hate it now. So yeah, we found that you almost take your heart out and just review the game and sort of think, right, but how does it play now? I'm currently going through this so I'm happy to tell you that 2 of my upcoming reviews are Steep Slope Sliders and Manx TT. And I'm currently going through them with a sort of 2022 hat on to determine whether I still enjoy them or whether they haven't stood the test of time. But we went sort of down that route purely because there are people that still collect games. So there are people, there was a guy in one of the Facebook groups recently who just started a Saturn collection. And, maybe somebody like that who reads our magazines and sort of, you could read an old magazine and a game might get 95%. But when we sort of re-review them, it's also sort of telling you whether it's still worth it or not. And you are a little bit. So I've got a Shining Force 3 review coming up. Still love the game. But when you look on eBay at the price for it, is it 150 quid's worth a game? It's a difficult balancing act.
Yeah. I think I used to enjoy Steep Slope Sliders back in the day, and it's more. I think you have to view it more like a racing game than a snowboarding game.
I've not gone back on it just yet, but my memories from back then were there was a lot of additional content. I seem to remember being able to. You had your main snowboarders, but you could unlock weird things like UFOs, and you could unlock extra tracks. I seem to think there was a wealth of unlockable content on it. So I'll really have to sort of dig deep and go back into it to see whether or not. But yeah, that's my memory from it, because I did have it back in the day. And I've picked it up again recently for the purposes of the re-review. The re-reviews I do are all done on proper consoles. I have to use emulation, of course, to then get the screenshots, because taking a picture of a Sega Saturn game is not good enough. But yeah, the Saturn games I'm currently reviewing are all done on original hardware, which then gives me the feel. I think with emulation, you sometimes sort of tempted into using modern day controllers. I like to put the original Saturn pad in so I can sort of give this is how it plays now. And I do have a lot of bother with the racing games now. When you're so used to trigger buttons for games like Forza, Gran Turismo, and you go back and play ones that are not compatible with any sort of analog pad, you are sort of, your thumb and your finger imprinted with your letter B or whatever it was. It's harder. So yeah, the reviews are all done on proper hardware, which gives us a sort of definitive re-review, really.
I think unless it's a racing game imprinted in your brain, like a Sega Rally or Gran Turismo, for me, where I know a lot of the tracks and I know the kind of, you get used to, the accelerator is either on or off, because we didn't have, analog throttle and brake. Going back to something like Manx TT, which I never really played back in the day, it is really hard. It does expose it. If you haven't got that kind of muscle memory of the tracks and the game and how the intricacies of the handling work, it is quite hard to go back to a lot of these early racers, really. I think that kind of the racing game genre is really the one kind of genre that's been allowed to blossom as kind of technology's gone on, because you want realism, and every generation gets better and better and better. So it really kind of exposes, the ones away from kind of maybe arcade racers. It really exposes them to a lot of their kind of flaws, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Sega Rally is a timeless classic. We all loved it when we went back to re-review it anyway. I still play it in the arcades now. If I see it sitting in a corner, I'll still put 50p a pound in and have a go on it. But you're right. That's the other thing we have to think about, of course, as technologies move forwards. That's where you sort of go back to certain games. So and back in the day, you wouldn't have even thought about it, because back then that was groundbreaking technology. So for me, when I played Manx TT, I recently played it actually just before I came onto the stream, and I'd forgotten how fast it was. So back then that was pretty groundbreaking. Now I'm gonna have to have a little bit more time with it, because I was in the wall most of the time. So yeah, you're right, and it's sort of, again, because you've got these games now, Grid, Forza Motorsport, Gran Turismo, that are ultra realistic, and every little bit of braking it does, and every little skid does what you're supposed to do. When you go back to some of these games and you're hitting the walls all the time, you've got to sort of get used to how it played back then again. But yeah, you're right, that the racing's probably one of the most evolved of the lot of them. Yeah,
definitely. And I think with Manx especially, when you look at it now, it's crazy to think that there's only 2 tracks on it, and they've charged 50 quid.
Yeah, that's getting mentioned in the review. I won't give too much about the re-review away, but let's just say that reverse tracks don't really wash with me. That's always been a bugbear with me. So although there are technically 4 tracks, 2 of them are the reverse mirror ones, and for me it's like, that's 2 tracks really, maybe 2.5 at a push. So yeah, that is something I've already jotted down as a note, actually.
I think that's one thing that really stood out for me, because with the Sony and the Namco games, there was always a lot more kind of, not depth to it, but there was always a lot more kind of unlockable things. And it took Sega kind of like a while to realize that, where people wanted the arcade game, but they wanted more from it. Sega Rally is kind of the exception, because those kind of tracks are almost like a work of art in terms of, you can play them until the cows come home. But the other games, like Manx TT especially, it's a hard sell in terms of the 2 tracks. Virtua Fighter as well. I've always found that with Virtua Fighter, the one thing that I struggled to relate with it was the lack of story. And I know with Virtua Fighter 1, it's more of a tech demo, but they could have expanded it. And even now, the lore in Virtua Fighter is kind of all over the shop. It is so vague. Whereas you could make an argument, say, oh, Tekken is, you know, the story is nonsensical, but you kind of know the backstory of, you know, certain characters, of Ryu or Mortal Kombat characters. And it does add kind of an extra layer in terms of wanting to progress, see the ending. Whereas I think Sega really kind of realized that with Fighters Mega Mix, but I think by then it was probably a little bit too late. You know, they needed to do that on their big arcade hits, I feel anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there was, in terms of Virtua Fighter, you've got to look at Virtua Fighter Kids as well and think, could that not just be an addition to one of the Virtua Fighters, you know, the mainstream games? Yeah, that's something. I mean, back then, sort of arcade ports were seen as pretty big things, and Sega were, you know, that was a selling point for Sega. That was something Sony couldn't do. They didn't have these sort of big developers back then, you know, that Sega, the AM of Sega did.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's a sort of fine line between simply porting an arcade game over and doing nothing with it, and adding tons and tons of extras. In the latest issue, we go a little bit in depth on Virtua Racing, which is a really strange one, actually.
Yeah.
Because there are certain ports of it which are literally the arcade ports, but there's a Saturn version that was built from the ground up, which for me is arguably the worst of the three of them.
Yeah.
It's more like a sort of Gran Turismo, a sort of hardcore simulation than it is a proper arcade racer, which is what Virtua Racing was. And I believe I'd put something along the lines of sort of saying, if the two were blended together, if you had that, the simulation and the old style, it would have been a perfect game. So yeah, you are correct in what you say with the ports. There are some brilliant ports, and there was some very let's get it quickly onto a machine so it sells copies ports as well. The big one for me, the biggest letdown, we haven't touched this yet in Sega Power, but I'm sure we will. I remember Sega Touring Car.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
I remember getting it for Christmas, and I remember the hype. It's going to be, you know, it's the Sega Rally Beater. This is the one. And I think I sold it about 2 months later. It was just so disappointing. And I've since bought it back and tried again, sort of with 2022 eyes, you know, give it another go, and I still hate it. So there are rushed ports.
I mean, exactly the same. I remember it coming out, and I was a massive Rally fan. I remember seeing Touring Car get advertised, and then I saw the review in Sega Saturn magazine, and I think they only gave like 74%, and your heart sort of dropped a little bit, and you're thinking, oh, like, what have they done? And for me, the main thing is just the speed of it. It's almost uncontrollable in terms of
we talk about going into the barriers on Mike's TT, but that's overkill. I struggle with the qualifying laps on Sega Touring Car. Every little bit of oversteer and you're just smashing off the walls, aren't you?
I mean, I think graphically it's quite good. I mean, obviously the frame rate's a little bit jumpy, but you know, the car models are quite good. The tracks are quite detailed as well. But you think if they just maybe reskinned Sega Rally into that you know, that game into sort of Sega Rally, you know, obviously doing away with the textures or, you know, the different terrains, could have had a winner rather than trying to almost copy like for like the arcade game. If they went a more custom route, it could have worked. But it's such a disappointment that, and even now, I mean, it's kind of just it's the most frustrating game. I know people say, oh, it plays better with the analog stick or the analog pad, but even then, it's still all over the place. It's a really hard game to try and play, especially when you're used to Sega Rally, really.
Yeah, that's it. The Sega Rally set the benchmark, and arguably during the Saturn's lifetime, nothing beat it in terms of racing games. In fact, I don't think anything did. So it was a pretty high bar that they set at the beginning. Yeah,
I mean, I think that was always one thing that it had over the PlayStation. Even things like, you know, V Rally and Tommy Mackinnon. It really wasn't until Colin McRae come out that it was like, you know, obviously it's very different, but it was like, that's comparable to Sega Rally. It took them a long time to kind of meet that bar, really. But I mean,
I think they opened up with, I want to say Ridge Racer. I think that was the one they were really hard selling at the beginning, wasn't it? Ridge Racer, I think it was. And of course, Tekken was their answer to Virtua Fighter. But for me, and I say this pretty biasly, Sega Rally was still the king even then. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy Ridge Racer, but for me, Sega Rally just beats it all ends up.
It was all about just shaving milliseconds off your best time. I mean, you'd have gone around the track 100 times before, but once you nail that, and the thing with Sega Rally is, it's like, if you've taken that corner badly, it screws up the rest of the race for you.
Yeah, or if you hit one of the cars, you have to be, you have to get to the perfect positions. You've got to get the wind trail off the copse at the end, but you've got to make sure that there is no cars. I remember the most frustrating part of Sega Rally for me was timing the, when you go over the overhead jumps.
Yeah.
And I sort of did it. So I was squeezed into the corner, but I managed to take 2 cars on it. But you went wrong slightly. You hit the barrier one side, you hit the car the other. You were a few places back, and you ain't going to that final race, basically.
Yeah.
Arcade-wise, we had a back at the holiday park I still go to it. They used to have a Sega Rally machine there. And I had to make sure I was on the leaderboard all ends up. My initials were all over it by the time I left. And then when I went back later on in the year, it was more, I had to still be on it. So, yeah, you're right. It's all about shaving that time off and the competitiveness, which is still there in abundance in Sega Rally.
And it's almost like when you watch the cars, the AI cars, I guess you'd say, they're trolling you because they take the corner so wide just to get in your way. Full well, you don't take that corner that wide, but they go right to the edge point and they clip it, and you think, oh, you bastard, you're just doing it to get them up bloody way, really. But fair play to them. I mean, they knew what they were doing, and I don't think apart from AM2, I don't think any other game makes the Saturn sing like that, really, or never. I don't think anyone really got the Saturn singing like Sega Rally did.
No, and it's the satisfaction as well. I mean, when you're playing through the arcade version, I mean, the satisfaction of nailing that hairpin, doing it perfectly, getting the swing. You're not going onto the verge. You've done it perfectly, and you think, right, here we go. This is the one. Yeah. There was nothing really that rivaled it. Back in my Saturn days back then, I think Manx TT came a close second to it. Nothing else. Daytona went in and out the disc slot. Touring car was sold, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah. Back in the day, mate. Back in the day. So we'll just jump to a few comments. We've got obviously Paul again. So Suplay is still my favourite mag ever, and yes, I know I write for Sega Powered. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Paul is our past, present, and future specialist. He'll tell you that time and time again.
So we've got Rob again. So if you've watched the live streams, I lambasted Croc for the downfall of 2D game popularity in the 32-bit era. Yeah, I did pick that up, Rob. You weren't very complimentary of Croc, really.
Yeah, most of the guys weren't either. Whereas I was sort of, it still holds a place in my heart, and it's still playable, and it's still enjoyable. But you've really got to try hard. You've got to get over the fact that every time Croc jumps and you're high up trying to get a gem, it will glitch. You've got the jumps, you've got to time them perfectly, otherwise you fall off. I played it with the analog pad actually, and I had a lot more success with that. Yeah, it's a frustrating game. The music, the sound effects, still absolutely beautiful. But going back to it now, it is a bit of a mess. Strangely, weird story. I didn't realise this till he got in touch. I had an inbox on Discord from one of the guys that was on the Sega Powered Discord who actually programmed Croc the game. So after I'd released the review, I had this guy get in touch, sort of saying, and he buys the magazine, he subscribes to it. So I was sort of thinking, oh no, here we go. But we had a really honest conversation about it, and I sort of gave him my bit, he gave him his bit, and it was pretty cool. And he sort of said himself, it hasn't stood the test of time. We know that now. And of course, the Croc Saturn version has one of the worst bugs in it that you will ever come across. Now, he told me he had no idea how that got in either, but you may know that if you boot Croc up normally on a Sega Saturn, he's missing his head, basically. You have to boot it from the BIOS screen. How that got in, I do not know. And I was told by this chap, that they weren't aware of it either till it was finished. So presumably, because you will get dev kits, won't you? And it had not shown anything up in there. It was only when the game was released to the masses did they realise that was pretty horrendous error. The other problem with the Saturn was we know that due to the complexity of the machine, that it was hard to do 3D in. We know it can be done. Lobotomy did it with absolute ease with their own drivers and engines. but to a lot of developers, it was difficult. I was playing Die Hard Trilogy, and I absolutely love Die Hard Trilogy, but I know the PlayStation version is better. It's got the lighting, it's got the effects. When I sort of separate that one and play our version, it's brilliant. But yeah, that was the sort of other pitfall with the Saturn. It was a bit of a sod to code for, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. I know that. I mean, I'm not a programmer in any respect, but from what you see about it now on paper, the Saturn is the more capable machine, but it's actually getting that kind of, it's like having an all-powerful engine, but the power it makes is so high up the rev range, you need to change gear before you lose that power again. And whereas the PlayStation is a much more kind of, overall, easier to manage kind of beast, really, isn't it? And whilst it probably, like I say, on paper, it probably wasn't as technical or as impressive, but it got the job done. It got the job done 9 times out of 10. Even if it did have warpy graphics and, glitching, polygons, but when you're looking at it and, the mass market were happy with it, that's what counted, really, rather than, kind of conversions that didn't stack up, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was a bit of Sega resting on the laurels as well. I mean, personally, while the Mega Drive in the end ultimately went on as long as the Saturn, I mean, the last FIFA game that was released on both was FIFA 98.
Yeah.
I think they sort of they chucked their eggs all in one basket. They killed the Mega Drive off a bit prematurely for me. It still had a bit to give. But ultimately, there was a bit of complacency. They'd won over the hearts, especially the Europeans, with the Mega Drive. It'd been a big success, and they sort of went into the Saturn thinking, yeah, we'll be all right. We'll do this, we'll do that. And I think Sony blindsided them a little bit. That was ultimately the start of the downfall. The Dreamcast, well ahead of its time, absolutely perfect console. But at the time of the Dreamcast, the Dreamcast had a whole year to itself, but there was always that murmuring in the background, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 2. And I mean, the launch lineup for the PlayStation 2 was bloody awful. If I remember correctly, one of the games was a fireworks simulator. Fantavision, was it?
Yeah.
And I think one of the sort of games that came out pretty quickly was Aqua Wetrix 2.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a lot to go by on it. But because Sony had built up such a hype machine, everybody just fell into place when it came out. And the Dreamcast, although it had for me, it was the pioneer in technology. It was online. You had a lot of original games. Skies of Arcadia, for example, is one of my favorite games of all time. Shenmue, that was, nothing was close to that at the time. But there was just this hype machine, this Sony hype machine. And I had it at school with all my mates. I was the one flying the Dreamcast flag, and they were, I'm probably going to get a PlayStation. They didn't really care what was on the PlayStation. They were just going to get a PlayStation. It was as simple as that.
Yeah. And even now, it's like with the PS4, PS5, there are still people that will buy the latest FIFA every year and the latest Call of Duty every year. And that's all they buy. They don't buy anything else. And it's like,
I must admit, I sort of have a wry smile on my face with the current gen consoles, because Sony are getting a bit of a taste of their own medicine now. So when you see the sort of argument, the Call of Duty argument, where they're going, no, you can't give Call of Duty, Microsoft are getting too many exclusive things. I think back to the Saturn era when I was being told, yeah, you ain't getting a Tomb Raider 2. Sony have taken that. You ain't getting this, you ain't getting that. Sony have signed an exclusivity deal for that. And it's almost come full circle and a bit calmer, really, because you've now got a company that have got even more money than Sony that have come in and are just bulldozing through it at the moment in Microsoft, gobbling up absolutely everything, the Game Pass. And so it's a little bit taste of their own medicine. So I do have a chuckle when Sony are kicking off about it, because I think, yeah, you guys did that in the 90s with Sega. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think even if the Dreamcast was a massive success, I think with the GameCube and the Xbox on the horizon, I don't think they could have competed against them, especially the Xbox. I mean, there's a big gap between the PS2 and the Xbox. So there's an even bigger gap between the Dreamcast and the Xbox. I don't think they could have hung out for too much longer with the big kids, unfortunately, as much as I would have loved it. I think if they'd done that, there probably would have been the modern day Atari and would become a cultural kind of icon for a certain period in time, and you'd see hipsters wearing Sega t-shirts now. That's what I think.
Yeah. I'm guessing that it was more a sort of staving off bankruptcy thing, because I think with the Dreamcast, I mean, they'd already released it at quite a cheap price point. It was about 200 quid, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was shaved down quite quickly. So I'm guessing that, ultimately that they were losing that much money that they had no option. I mean, I remember reading when they first announced, that's it, we're getting out of the hardware market, which, pretty much kiboshed a lot of the new releases. It was a shock to me, because I sort of thought it was strange, because with the Saturn you knew it was dying, but with the Dreamcast it was a bit, all of a sudden you're reading these articles, right? Yes, that you have the little rumors that Sega are pulling out, and then when it came out, and right, that's it, that's your lot, we're going.
Yeah,
it was quite a shock to me. I personally thought the Dreamcast had quite a few more years left, and when you look at the games that came out after the Dreamcast death was announced, the ones that stick in my head: Shenmue 2, Virtua Tennis 2, which I absolutely love to bits, Headhunter, games like that were still coming out after the sort of Dreamcast had been announced as gone. That was a big shock to me. I ultimately went to Camp Nintendo. My first console I had after that was a GameCube, and I'm now geeky enough to have branched into all of them, so I own them all these days. But I always felt that the GameCube was the spiritual home of Sega after that. Your Sonic.
But people say Xbox, don't they?
Yeah, well, for me, so the Xbox, I mean, they got Jet Set Radio Future, didn't they? And they got Shenmue, but it was the Super Monkey Balls and the sort of Sonic Adventures and the Skies of Arcadia remake on the Nintendo console. That was sort of what made me follow the path. But ultimately, I ended up with them all after that. My loyalty waned quite quickly after the Dreamcast had died.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I have no loyalty to any brand. I've had an Xbox, I've had PlayStation, and I've got Switch and whatever else. When you have got sort of Sega under your skin, it's very hard to kind of get that feeling for anything else. Really, it's like the whole thing with the Sega is, there is a certain feeling from a Sega game, really, regardless of what genre it's in. You just get that sort of feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've only had that feeling with Sega. While I sort of moosed on over to Nintendo afterwards, and for a while I was banging the Nintendo drum. I remember Resident Evil 4 coming out on the GameCube, and a lot of my mates coming round to my house to watch me on it because they got it first. But there just wasn't that charm. There just wasn't that new game that sort of made you, like your Shenmue, for example. That, for me, there was nothing comparable with that on any console. Skies of Arcadia, when I first played that, I knew it was turn-based. I'm quite into my turn-based RPGs, so I bought it on that premise. And again, I became that immersed in the world. It's still a game I go back and play on. And I just don't think you get that as much these days. I can't say that there's been a game that I've picked up recently and I've become that immersed in it, I've sort of fallen in love with it. Whereas back in the Sega days, a lot of the first party stuff that you did, you Panzer Dragoon Saga, another one that I fell in love with. Christmas Nights, that goes in the disc tray every year.
Yeah,
they're just that sort of romantic element of it anymore is probably the best way of describing it.
Yeah, I'd agree. Just go through these comments, Mark. So the first one we've got is Champion Rob again. The Ridge Racer only have one track. Yeah, it really did. And I think the tracks were just literally just extensions of that original track, really. Bygone time, wasn't it?
I think it shows you, though, how much people bought into the PlayStation, because it didn't matter. They could release something like that and everybody went, oh, what a game. That was really people just buying into the whole Sony philosophy, really.
Yeah, they really did. Sony had the arcade fans in their collaboration with Namco. Yeah, I mean, Namco was kind of the answer to their Sega, really, wasn't it? It was, without, they were almost. I mean, I think Namco were always long-term rivals in the arcade, but when they went with PlayStation, they had the kind of the financial backing to go sort of head-to-head with Sega, really, to a degree, I think.
Yeah, Sony needed somebody on board. Sega, of course, didn't. They had the sort of arcade stuff, and I think probably it made sense with Namco to become the home on the Sony PlayStation to rival them. Would they have sold as well on Sega consoles? Probably not, because you'd have split the fan base. So it was a sensible decision, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely. Much the same as Squaresoft as well, I think.
Yeah, that's a strange one, that one, isn't it?
Yeah. Because one
Yeah,
thing.
Croc. So, sorry, go on.
Oh yeah. So Paul was saying, as we all know, 3D platforms don't hold up today. I bought Croc, and it was one of the better ones. 6 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. So on a Saturn side of things, it was one of a handful that I enjoyed. Swagman remains my favourite platform on the Saturn. It's a bit polarizing for some people because it's more like a puzzle sort of game. I absolutely love it. Pandemonium, I enjoyed that. And then you've got your Sonic 3D, which was a bit of a cheat, really, wasn't it? And then on the PlayStation, in terms of platformers I enjoyed on the PlayStation, I think it was the Gex 3D Enter the Gecko and Gex Undercover Gecko. They were the two, along with the Spyro series and Crash Bandicoot. Everything else, I played Jersey Devil, played a few others, and they never really did it for me. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Croc's better on the PlayStation, sadly. But we'll just gloss over that. So yeah, for me, Croc was one. It was a bold attempt at something different.
Yeah.
In a world of which platformers were very speedy and very hectic, Croc's quite a methodical chap. He's quite slow, obviously aimed at kids. But yeah, I got some enjoyment out of Croc back then. Still do now. It's just, as you say, the 2022 hasn't been as kind to it.
No, it was originally. I mean, you probably know yourself, but it was originally pitched to Nintendo as a Yoshi game, and you can see. I mean, he pretty much is Yoshi. I mean, in his design, just slight alterations. He's a crocodile, but you can see he's basically Yoshi.
Yeah, absolutely. I referenced that in the opening paragraph about the, about it potentially being going across to the Nintendo system. So yeah, we did make reference to that in the re-review.
Yeah, it's interesting how things turn out, really. So Rob's come back with an interesting question. He says, "Do you think the 32X and Saturn could have coexisted if they marketed them better?"
I'm going to be a bit controversial here. I wish that the 32X hadn't existed. For me, what they should have done, so I think that was the problem the Saturn had. So you had these two add-ons, the Mega CD and the 32X, that came and went very quickly. In the case of the 32X, I think that was killed pretty swiftly because Sega were they were banging the Saturn drum. If those consoles hadn't been released and you went straight from the Mega Drive up to the Saturn, or maybe the Mega CD did have a market as well, but I think it's a little bit like the Wii U. When Sega announced the Saturn and when it came out, there was a lot of confusion. Well, 32X, it's Mega CD. And I think a lot of people had then, especially the hardcore gamers, had sort of looked at it and gone, well, they've killed them two off pretty quickly in favour of this Saturn machine. Are we going to have another? I think the add-ons actually hurt Sega personally. The 32X, when that was launched, it wasn't long out. I think the Saturn drum was already being beaten at that time. So for me, they would have been better just going from the Mega Drive to the Saturn organically. The add-on bit, I mean, again, it was a little bit naive, Sega sort of thinking they could have this tower of power and no matter what they pumped out, people would buy it, and it wasn't the case. I remember the Mega CD more fondly than I do the 32X. I never owned the 32X. It's the only Sega console I've never owned. But by the time the Saturn had come out, you had this sort of, everybody had got it in the head that Sega were a bit rip-off merchants. Well, you've charged me hundreds of quid for this, hundreds of pounds for this, and now you want me to pay 400 odd quid for this new system that apparently is the one. So yeah, I think a little bit like when Nintendo announced the Wii U and everybody thought it was merely an add-on. It was a pretty disastrous launch, and you had the sort of Sony mic drop moment where they announced the price, walked off stage, and that was your lot basically. So yeah, I think that was the sort of add-ons were potentially beginning. I don't think that they could have coexisted. I do think the Mega Drive could have coexisted longer with the Saturn, personally. But yeah, that is just my humble opinion.
Yeah, I've always thought that if the 32X was released in place of the Mega CD at the time the Mega CD was launched, that would have been amazing, because those kind of early Polygon games, that was the time to get them out 2 years before the 32X come out. You know, Arcade Perfect, Space Harrier, Afterburner, Outrun, you know, beautiful games like Calibri, you know, and, expanding Knuckles, Chaotix, the Sonic lore, Sonic Unity. That was the time to get the 32X out, not when it was coming to a close to Mega Drive, you know, and I think knocking the Mega CD on the head, getting the 32X out, couple of years before, that would have been the time to get it out, and I reckon it would have been a big success, because then that is the time for people to then go, right, you've dipped your toe in the water of 3D gaming. Now you're ready for the main course, which is the Saturn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. So we got Scott. Sad gaming when Sega pulled out of the hardware market. I don't think the industry has ever been the same. Sega always took the gamble and experimented, avoid this ever being replaced. Yeah, very much so. I remember, I worked at Game when the Dreamcast was out, and I remember seeing Sonic Adventure on the Cube for the first time. Honestly, it felt like seeing your missus in bed with another bloke.
Yeah.
It was just that kind of that feeling.
Yeah, and I always remember reading the letters pages from cover to cover in the Mega Drive magazines, and people always said, will a Sonic game ever come out on the Nintendo? No, don't be stupid. That's never good. Not in a million years is that going to happen. And then all of a sudden, I remember reading, so back when the Dreamcast had been announced as dead, and the Dreamcast magazines closed down, we were left with one unofficial Dreamcast magazine. And I remember them doing a whole feature, basically giving you a roadmap of where you need to go to get your Sega fix. And it broke my heart, to be fair. And I was still sort of thinking, but we're still going to get Res, we're still going to get this, we're still going to get that, and just clinging on to that final part of the Sega puzzle. I think it was a sad day in gaming personally as well. We just have to be thankful they're still here. They could have gone, you say, down the Atari route and completely bankrupt themselves.
Yeah, totally.
So for me, it was, they had to pull out because of the the money situation, basically. Form themselves a software market, and they're still around. We get people now that still live in hope one day there'll be a new Sega console. I don't think there ever will be. We're still waiting for the Saturn Dreamcast Mini, aren't we? So I think that first.
I think the only time you'll ever see a new console is if someone, like a Samsung, buys them out and wants to deliberately get into the market and tap into that kind of branding. But again, why would they? They've got a strong enough image in their own respect. That's the only thing that I would kind of think, a company would use them for. And again, it would be a shell of what they were. It would just be a storefront, really. It wouldn't be any kind of tangible link to what was gone before, really.
Yeah.
But I can't see it happening. So Rob has said when EA dumped the Dreamcast, that was a big chunk of the casual market lost. I think for me, the big thing was the lack of football game. It killed it.
So I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who used to work at EA, because I was always of the opinion that something had happened along the lines of EA had said to Sega, right, we'll develop for the Dreamcast, but we have to be the sports brand. Nobody else is allowed. We want to be your number one.
Yeah.
And Sega had sort of said, no, we've got our own sports brand. Thank you very much. You had your worldwide soccer games, for example. But he told a very different story. He said it was basically down to hardware figures. So whether that's true or not is another matter. But he told me sort of quite openly that when he was there, that they'd basically had a discussion and decided, right, if the Dreamcast numbers are massively up at any point, we'll consider it. But if they don't get to a level that where we want them to, that's it. We're not interested. EA was a shame because towards the end of the Saturn shelf life, they pumped some tat out for the console. I remember playing FIFA Road to World Cup '98, and on the Saturn it was awful. PlayStation version was pretty fluid. The Saturn version was almost like an afterthought, a bit like what they're doing with the Switch now, actually.
Yeah.
So it was almost like EA had given up at that point and were just pumping crap out. I don't remember any of their final sports games fondly. NHL '98 was another one. So it was a shame how it ended with them. But I was told, at least by this former executive, that it was more a financial numbers game as opposed to them wanting to be the dominant brand. Yes, it will have affected the Dreamcast, absolutely, because people look at big names. They don't particularly look at the quality of games. So when a company like that announced, because they were quite open and honest in announcing we ain't developing anything for the Dreamcast, so it will have hurt. It's just one of them things. But I agree. EA games would have been a welcome addition.
Yeah, I think certainly in Europe, the lack of an ISS or Pro Evo, as it's called, or FIFA, you know, that's a big loss in terms of not having the footy game on there. You know, you've got to have a decent game. You know, like you say, you see it with the Switch now, really, don't you? So Scott is saying EA wanted exclusive sports rights on the Dreamcast. Sega told them to them. So yeah, as you said, I suppose there was some degree of truth in that to a degree, but like I say, numbers talk, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah, and hence why they still sell the legacy version on the Switch, which is a reskin. Everything that is a reskin.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, they don't hide that. They don't hide it. So EA had the popular brands. So yeah, I mean, it's not just the sports games, is it? I mean, it is everything that goes cap in hand with EA as well, in terms of, like, you know, a lot of their other titles.
Yeah, you had a lot of in the racing games. I mean, EA, I think, have just announced culling some of the racing games because, of course, they've acquired Codemasters now. But yeah, things like that as well. They had a massive, and they had a lot of big brands on board, didn't they? So yeah, we lost a lot of potential Dreamcast titles.
Yeah, totally. So Scott said Sega and Bug were both crap, even back in the day for me.
I didn't like Bug at all. I found it a pain in the backside. It was one of them games that just frustrated me to the point where I didn't want to play it. So it's not a game I've delved into much. It was the same with Bug 2. I sort of blank canvas and I thought, I'll give this a go. And it was the same problem. I just didn't enjoy it. It was just annoying me. But yeah, Crop holds a little place in that. But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Bug.
I always found that Bug and Clockwork Knight were of the same ilk, really. They were kind of they're obviously very early games in the library, and they're almost just kind of technical, what they can get away with, what they can't. You know, they play all right, but they're not groundbreaking in any respect, really.
Yeah, the same with the role-playing game. One of the primitive ones that came out, Mystaria. It's actually a really good game, but if you try and play it once you've played Shining the Holy Ark, Shining Force, and that sort of game, it's very difficult to go back to it because the graphics are so primitive now, as opposed to what they were like in '95 when they were groundbreaking. You struggle to play it, basically. And I think it's the same with games like Bug and Clockwork Knight. I actually enjoyed Clockwork Knight a little bit more. But again, when I played it back in the day, I had the blinkers on. It was new console, and every game, when a new console launches, it doesn't matter what game comes out at it, you're just blown away by it. It could be rubbish. You're blown away by it at the time, aren't you? Because you think, oh, this is brilliant. Graphics are never going to get better than this. And then 3 years down the line, you're sort of playing it back and going, actually, it wasn't that good, was it?
No, totally not. So Rob disagrees. Bug is not a 3D platformer. It's fun. Scott is saying, I prefer Sega Sports. If EA got their way, then we wouldn't have Virtua Tennis or Virtua Striker. So yeah, it's true to a degree.
Virtua Tennis for me was groundbreaking. So an arcade, a quick, easy to play arcade simulator type of tennis. For me, I still struggle to play other ones. I still play the back catalogue of Virtua Tennis now. I find it so easy to play. I played one recently, a new one. I think it was called AO Tennis. And you have to, not only do you have to hit the ball back, but you've got to then move the cursor to pinpoint where you want the ball to land.
Okay.
And for me, it was just a faff. Whereas Virtua Tennis, you just hit the ball. You just have to be good on your reflexes. And for me, it's not been bettered. I've been lobbying Sega for ages for a new entry into that series. And I still go back and play Virtua Tennis 4 now. That if ever a game deserved a new entry into the series, it's that one.
Yeah, outstanding game. So Scott is saying Sega America to blame for the 32X.
So Sega America and Sega Japan were at loggerheads all the time. And I remember as a kid, I used to email Sega Europe all the time. And you pretty much got Sega of America and Sega of Japan were fighting. And then the answers you got from Sega Europe were, we haven't got a clue, to be honest with you. And you'd ask, so Shenmue 2. So when I'd first read in a magazine that Shenmue 2 wasn't going to be locally translated, I emailed Sega of Europe and sort of said, and they sort of replied and went, we don't really know. We're not sure what's happening. We know it's coming out, but we can't really tell you either way what's going to happen with it. So it was very much sort of Japan and America at each other's throats, and Europe were in the background going, not really sure what's happening. We'll just see what happens, see where the wind takes us, basically. But yeah, the infighting wasn't helpful. I mean, what does everybody remember with the Saturn? The quote, "The Saturn is not our future." Was said, and there's a lot of misconceptions about where it was said. He didn't stand up on a plinth and announce that sort of freely, but that's the one that everybody remembers, isn't it? The Saturn is not our future, and that was the beginning of the end of the Saturn.
Yeah.
The infighting definitely there. In fact, if I remember correctly, Scott, didn't we have this with the Dreamcast? One of them had announced the Dreamcast was closing, and the other one had said we've heard nothing of the sort. I think that was pretty much how the Dreamcast was announced as finished, wasn't it? One of them said something, the other one came out and said, "Don't know anything about that," and the rest is history.
I've always thought that you can say, "Oh, Nintendo did this and Sony are the cause of this." To me, they're not. They're just a competition. Sega were their own worst enemies. They did so much damage themselves, regardless of what the competition were doing.
Yeah, you've got to be smart. I mean, Tomb Raider was a kick in the teeth, but when you look at the fact that Sega had it first, and not everybody knows that actually, and we had it first for it was about a month, but the advertising wasn't there. There was really no advertising on it at all. Whereas Sony, we'll take Lara Croft on board. She'll become a mascot for us. And a lot of people associate Lara Croft with PlayStation. And of course, we know we got it first. It was designed with the Saturn in mind. So you're right. It was a series of almost complacent decisions. And I mean, Nintendo did it in later years with Resi 4. That was an exclusive to the GameCube. It ended up on the PS2 because the advertising just wasn't there. Architects of their own downfall is definitely factual. It didn't help that Sony were throwing money around as well. But yeah, there were some questionable decisions.
Yeah, totally. We come out to 10 now, Mark. So we'll look at probably wrapping it up in about 10 minutes or so, mate. So we'll just crack through these comments. So Sega America knew the Saturn was coming out, but Sega America still pushed the 32X. Sega American Japan was not in sync, playing both. So yeah, just echoing a lot of what we've said, really. Saturn is also £100 more than PlayStation launch. Yeah. Still hurts to see big Sega games. Let it go, Scott. Let it go. Saying that I'm playing Sonic Frontiers on PS5 when I'm watching this. So Amazon or Google's partner of Sega. EA would say that. So Rob said, I've never cared about Rambo. It was sad to see Sega drop out the hardware market, and it was weird seeing Sonic on other consoles, but I was happy just to have Sega around. So yeah, that's a fair comment really as well. Scott says, yeah, I'm happy Sega is still around. Dreamcast had record sales in the first 12 months, which is very true. Record-breaking launch, and EA didn't add up. And Rob has just said, does Sega Power cover all Sega systems or just the Saturn and Dreamcast?
We do. We cover all systems indeed. So I reviewed GameCube then. What a harlot. Game Gear games, Master System. We've done 32X Mega CD. Our issue 2 actually takes a look at a lot of rare Sega hardware that people are not necessarily aware of. I like to think myself as a big Sega zealot, but there was stuff in there that amazed me. Yeah, that's the one. So yeah, we're all about all the sort of retro systems, and we're all about the indie games on the newer systems as well. With the indie games, it is mainly Mega Drive and Dreamcast and a bit of Saturn, but with the retro stuff, yeah, we cover everything. We're an all-round Sega package. We're not one to start slating any machine off in the magazine. The games were, much as the Mega CD and the 32X, that were still part of Sega history. We still cover the games that, as you said earlier on, there's some cracking games on the machines. I remember playing NHL 94 on the Mega CD, and there was the intro, the FMV footage. All right, wasn't a great deal different to the Mega Drive when you got into the core of it, but there was still that, oh, wow, there's a 3D video bit here. So yeah, we're all over all the consoles, and we give each one an equal amount of love. Of course, we don't have the games for the others, the CD and the 32X, but we still give them an equal amount of love, yeah.
Yeah. So, Rob, if you haven't got any, get some issues, mate. Very, very recommended.
We've got on the Kickstarter at the moment, we've got a sampler issue. We haven't got a sampler issue. You can actually download issue 5 and read it digitally. So if anybody wants to jump on that to see what we're all about, that's your best chance of doing it. And you'll notice we've got a sort of swath of different things in there, yeah. Yeah,
definitely. So, Mark, you wanted to do a bit of a reveal, didn't you? I understand.
Yes. So, but earlier on, we were talking about Sega Mags. And what we thought we'd come up with a fantastic way of knowing when magazines ended. So a lot of the Maverick magazines, so Maverick bought a lot of Mega Drive magazines up in the 90s, Megatech, Mega, they had Mega Drive Advanced Gaming. And what tended to happen was they burnt them to the ground, turned them into pamphlets, and you ended up with specials, such as this Megatech one here. I've chosen this one purely because it's actually got quite a nice cover. So guide special. Now, we know a lot of magazines ended up as poster specials, so they had even less pages in them and became poster issues. And we always thought that a poster issue meant the end of a magazine. However, it doesn't. So what I have in my hands here now, unfortunately, this is a really horrible copy of it. My Sega Mags colleague Matt's got a better one. We managed to find 2 of them. And this should be a sort of exclusive reveal for you guys. This is actually Sega Zone issue 24. So issue 23 was a poster special, and we'd assumed that was it, dead, gone. There was no next month page. But there was actually a second poster special of the magazine. That opens a bit of a new rabbit hole for us, because we've now had our theory that only 1 poster issue per magazine is blown out the water. Now, my issue, although it's a bit scabby, does still have the Balls poster in it. And as you can see, it's very primitive. Oh, it's falling out now. Everything else was very sort of primitive. It was more a roundup. So issues 24 of Sega Zone, we've got 2 copies of it. Matt managed to source it, so he's had the better copy of it. It was from a guy who had plundered a newsagent's that had closed down in the day, so he literally bought the remaining stock up. Now, when we do the Sega Mags Quest and we ask for issues, we get a lot of people that say, I don't have the issues that you're looking for. I've only got this one. And they'll say, we don't have issues 22, 21, but I've got issue 24, but that's not on your list. And we sort of go, oh, bollocks, that's a new one. And that's what we did with him, with this guy. So, yes, that's a bit of a reveal. So we can now tell you, for all those that are looking to complete Sega magazines, that are 24 issues of Sega Zone. That then means that there may be further issues of other poster specials, such as Megatech. So that was a bit of a new sort of, it was, I don't know whether to feel happy or sad about that, because you sort of think you have an end point, and then something like that comes along. Bagger. For all we know now, there could be another 6 issues of Sega Zone limping on in that way. So, that's an exclusive. As far as I'm aware, nobody else on the Tinterweb has got that. Really? So that's an exclusive for you guys. I'll put it up on the Sega Mags channel later on. But yes, that's a new find for us. And if there's anybody watching that has a list of Sega magazines they need, you can add Sega Zone issue 24 to that listing now as well. Yeah,
I don't think I would want to be chasing another magazine. I'd imagine that you're probably already having sleepless nights over the ones you haven't got. So to add more stress.
We've often had people say to us, well, have you thought about there's a German version of this, there's an American version? No, it's got to be UK. We had to stick to that, otherwise it would just drive us absolutely bonkers. I've gone down that hole already with theme parks, starting from the UK collection and branching out, and it's a never-ending task, basically. But we now know there's 24 issues of Sega Zone, and that not a lot of people know that, as a great actor once said.
Good stuff. Right, so I think we'll probably wrap it up, Mark. Thank you very much for coming on, mate. I really do appreciate it. I think it's been great having you on. Like I said, with the Sega sessions, I want to try and get obviously me and Pete. We want to try and get guys who, in the YouTube community, there's a big live stream kind of thing going on, but we want to try and maybe get away from maybe YouTube kind of stuff, and you really fit the bill perfectly in terms of being so kind of your presence is definitely out there in terms of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, in terms of you're the magazine man. So
the mag man, that's the tag I've been given.
Yeah, definitely. So you're a perfect guest, mate. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me on. It's been great talking all things Sega, basically. And for, obviously, I've got to do my little advertising bit. Anybody that hasn't got Sega Powered yet, they're all issues are available on sale. So if you want to grab a copy or support the annual, which we've got a lot of exclusive new content going into that we're working on as well, then we plan on being around for a while yet.
Yeah, definitely, mate. It's a really good magazine, and more power to you. And hopefully it just grows from strength to strength, really. We'll just finish up a few comments. So Rob says, who wouldn't have balls hanging on their wall? I'll give you a funny story, actually. So I recently picked up a Rye Star from CEX I've got a complete one now, but the first one I picked up, it was missing the manual. It was going to go back, but it was just a placeholder. But I booted it up, and someone had swapped the PCB of Ristar with balls. So I wasn't too pleased about that, and brought it back to CEX. And then about a couple of hours later, they listed it again, even though I'd said to them, "It's not the game."
Yeah.
CEX really. And we've got the Sega legend, Sega Zombie. So thank you very much, Scott. Always appreciate your presence, mate. So Mark, just finally, where can people find your good self?
Well, me, usually on the Facebook, Discord, and Twitter channels. So I'm pretty amiable. So you can find me on a lot of the Facebook groups. You can find me on Twitter, find me on Discord. I'm always happy to answer questions. Sega Powered, you can find the magazine also on socials. SegaPowered.com if you want to order any issues. We've got some presents coming up at the end of the year as well. So I'm taking Sega Mags to the Walsall Crash Live event. I'm taking it to Birmingham for the Birmingham Gaming Market. And we are both going to be there, Sega Powered and Sega Mags, at the Nottingham Expo at the end of the year. That's going to be a really, really big one for us. We're sponsoring it as Sega Powered. Cool. So I've sort of cheaply tagged Sega Mags along as well. And I'm going to have exclusive magazines across all formats there. The Nottingham one, I've announced some of my magazines already. I'm going to take some exclusive Saturn mags. I've got Mean Machines, Sega going, Mean Machines, and they're all going to be really well priced. Nothing I sell is beyond £4 each currently. That will go up next year with inflation, sadly. But if you want a magazine bargain, that's where you'll find me. Walsall, Birmingham, and Nottingham to round the year off. And then we're going to be hopefully doing the circuit next year and a little bit more sort of expanding the horizons. I want to play Blackpool for the first time. I want us to take Sega Powered and Sega Mags there. I'm already chatting the guys up to do that. Fingers crossed, you'll see us in quite a few different places next year.
Good. Yeah, hopefully our paths will cross at one of these events, mate. So
absolutely, I look forward to it.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Right, we'll call it quits there. Thank you very much, guys, to everyone in the comments as well. Thanks again, Mark. So I will call it a day, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.